A broke farmer found a World War II bomber buried in his cornfield. The military said it crashed in 1945 and was empty. But when he opened the cargo hold at midnight, he discovered why men in black suits had been watching his farm for 70 years. Tom Crawford's combine harvester hit something that shouldn't have been there. The impact threw him forward against the steering wheel, and the machine shuddered to a halt with a grinding screech of metal. Tom killed the engine and climbed down, expecting a boulder or maybe an old well cap. What he found instead made his hands shake. Protruding from the Missouri soil was a section of corroded metal, curved and riveted. Aircraft aluminum. He'd seen enough of it during his brief stint in the Air National Guard to recognize it immediately. Tom knelt beside the exposed section, brushing away dirt with hands calloused from 40 years of farming. The metal was old, really old, with corrosion patterns suggesting decades underground. He could make out faded markings beneath the rust, numbers and letters that might have been military designations once. His farm was 300 acres of struggling corn and soybeans outside Sedalia, Missouri. Middle of nowhere. No airports nearby, no flight paths overhead. What was a plane doing buried in his field? He called his son, Jake, who drove out from town with a shovel and his smartphone ready to document whatever Dad had found. Jake was 28, worked at a car dealership, thought farming was a dying profession. He'd made that clear enough times, but he showed up when called, which counted for something. Dad, is that what I think it is? Jake circled the exposed metal, filming with his phone. That's a plane. Like a whole plane buried here. Looks that way. Tom started digging around the edges, trying to determine the size. After an hour of work, they'd exposed enough to confirm it. A bomber, probably B-17 or B-24 based on the fuselage curve. World War II era. Buried maybe 6 feet down, which explained why decades of plowing had never hit it. Jake was already Googling on his phone. Dad, do you know how much World War II planes are worth? Collectors pay millions for restored warbirds. This could be huge. Tom wasn't thinking about money. He was thinking about how a bomber ended up buried in Missouri farmland. Crashes made craters, left debris fields. They didn't result in intact aircraft buried neatly underground. This plane had been put here deliberately. The question was why. Over the next week, Tom and Jake excavated carefully. They couldn't afford professional equipment, so it was manual labor, shovels and sweat. But gradually the plane emerged. A B-24 Liberator, nearly intact despite 70-some years underground. The wings were damaged, but the fuselage was surprisingly whole, and stenciled on the tail, barely visible through corrosion, was a designation, 823rd Bombardment Squadron. Jake researched the unit, found records showing the 823rd had been stationed in England during the war, flying missions over Germany, but no records of any planes going missing over Missouri. No crash reports, no incident logs. According to official history, every 823rd bomber was accounted for. So what was this one doing buried in Tom's cornfield? Before they could investigate further, visitors arrived. 2 men in dark suits, government credentials, serious expressions. They pulled up in a black sedan that looked too expensive for rural Missouri. Tom met them at the excavation site, Jake filming from a distance despite the men's objections. Mr. Crawford, I'm Agent Dalton. This is Agent Pierce. We're with the Defense Department. The shorter man showed identification too quickly for Tom to read details. We understand you've uncovered military property. Tom crossed his arms. It's on my land. Been here since before I bought the farm in 1985. That makes it my property under salvage law. Agent Dalton's smile was professionally pleasant and completely empty. The aircraft is classified government property. We'll need you to cease excavation and turn over all documentation. We'll handle removal. What was it carrying? Tom asked the question before thinking. Why bury a whole bomber instead of salvaging it after the war? Agent Pierce stepped forward, his presence more threatening than his partner's. That's classified information, Mr. Crawford. Your cooperation is mandatory, not optional. Interference with military operations is a federal crime. Then get a warrant. Tom surprised himself with his stubbornness. I'm not stopping you from taking the plane, but I want to know what's in it first. It's been on my land for 70 years. I've got a right to know. The agents exchanged glances. Finally, Dalton spoke. We'll return tomorrow with proper authorization. In the meantime, do not enter the aircraft. Do not remove anything. And do not discuss this discovery with anyone. Is that clear? After they left, Jake was excited and nervous. Dad, they're covering something up. Whatever's in that plane, it's worth hiding. We should look before they come back. Tom knew his son was right. But he was also 62 years old, with a bad heart and a farm drowning in debt. Poking around in government secrets was a young man's game. Still, curiosity gnawed at him. What could be worth burying for 70 years? That night, Tom couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the plane, about the agent's barely concealed urgency. Around midnight, he gave up on rest. Pulled on work clothes, grabbed a flashlight, and drove his truck out to the field. The excavation site was quiet under a half moon. The exposed bomber looked like a ghost, pale metal gleaming in flashlight beams. Tom had cleared enough dirt that the cargo door was accessible. It was corroded shut, but his crowbar made quick work of frozen hinges. The door fell open with a screech of protesting metal. Tom aimed his flashlight inside. The cargo hold was intact, protected from decades of soil by the fuselage's seal, and stacked inside, wrapped in deteriorating canvas and military-grade waterproof containers, were crates, dozens of them. Tom climbed inside carefully, testing each step. The plane's floor held his weight. He approached the nearest crate, pulled away the canvas covering. Stenciled on the wood were words that made his blood run cold. Property of US Army. Manhattan Project. Top secret. Do not open. Manhattan Project. Even a farmer in Missouri knew what that meant. The atomic bomb program. But the war had ended in 1945. Why would Manhattan Project materials be buried in the American heartland? Tom's hands trembled as he used the crowbar to pry open the crate. Inside, packed in lead-lined containers, were metal cylinders, each one marked with radiation warnings and serial numbers. And tucked in one corner was a logbook, sealed in plastic, somehow preserved. Tom pulled it out and opened it carefully. The logbook's first page was dated April 1945. Flight manifest for B-24 Liberator tail number 42-51-73, 823rd Bombardment Squadron. Mission: transport classified materials from Los Alamos to secure storage facility. Below that, someone had written in pen, materials diverted per orders from Colonel Sanderson. Original destination compromised. Emergency burial protocol enacted. God help us all if these are ever found. Before you find out what happened next, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We've got more incredible stories coming that you absolutely won't want to miss. Tom photographed every page with shaking hands. The logbook detailed a mission gone wrong. The bomber had been transporting enriched uranium from Los Alamos to a storage facility on the East Coast. But mid-flight, the crew had received orders that the destination was compromised, possibly by Soviet spies. They were diverted to an emergency landing site in Missouri, told to bury the plane and its cargo, and sworn to secrecy. The crew had been reassigned immediately afterward, scattered to different units. Most had probably died by now, taking the secret to their graves. Tom climbed out of the plane as dawn was breaking. His phone buzzed. Text from Jake. Dad, where are you? There are more government people at the house, like a dozen of them. Tom looked back at the bomber. At cargo that could still be dangerous 70 years later. At secrets the government had buried and clearly wanted to stay buried. He'd found something worth $10 million in historical value, but he'd also found something that could get him killed for knowing too much. The question was what to do with it, and he had maybe an hour before the agents came looking for him. Tom drove back to his farmhouse to find it surrounded by vehicles. Not just the agent's sedan from yesterday, but military trucks, a mobile command unit, and personnel in hazmat suits. Jake stood on the porch looking scared and angry. His son rushed over as Tom parked. Dad, where were you? These people showed up an hour ago with a warrant. They're saying the plane is contaminated, that we're all in danger, are we? Tom thought about the uranium cylinders, about 70 years of decay and potential leakage. Possibly. But they're more worried about us knowing what's in there than actual contamination. Agent Dalton approached with another man, this one in a military uniform. Stars on his collar marked him as a general. Mr. Crawford, this is General Harding. He'll explain the situation. Tom crossed his arms, tired and angry. I already understand the situation. You buried enriched uranium on my land 70 years ago. Never told anyone. Never checked if it was leaking. Never compensated the family that's been farming contaminated soil for decades. General Harding's expression was carefully controlled. The burial was an emergency measure during a critical period of national security. The material wasn't weapons grade, just reactor fuel being transported for research. And our surveys indicate minimal contamination. Your farm is safe. Then why the hazmat suits? Jake gestured at the personnel setting up equipment. Why the urgency if everything's safe? Because the material's still valuable and still classified, Dalton cut in. And because Soviet intelligence, or what's left of it, has been looking for this plane since 1945. If word gets out that it's been found, we'll have foreign agents all over this area. Tom processed that. You're saying people have been searching for this for 70 years? Not continuously. Harding took over explaining. But periodically, yes. There were rumors during the Cold War about missing Manhattan Project materials. The Soviets investigated every lead. Even now, certain foreign governments would pay handsomely for confirmation of this plane's location and contents. Your discovery has already attracted attention. We intercepted communications this morning from unknown parties showing interest in your excavation. How would they know? Tom felt cold fear settling. We haven't told anyone except Jake, and he hasn't posted anything online yet. Your son filmed the excavation site. Dalton's tone was accusing. Posted several videos to social media showing military aircraft markings. Those posts were flagged by monitoring systems. We took them down within hours, but the damage is done. Foreign intelligence services saw them. Jake looked stricken. I just thought it was cool finding a piece of history. I didn't know it was dangerous. Now you do. General Harding softened slightly. Which is why we need your cooperation. We'll remove the aircraft and its cargo within 48 hours. You'll be compensated fairly for your land's use and for any contamination. Though again, our readings show minimal risk, and you'll sign non-disclosure agreements regarding everything you've seen. And if we refuse? Tom asked it already knowing the answer. Then we'll classify your entire property as a national security site and restrict your access. Dalton said it matter-of-factly. You'll be allowed to live here but barred from the excavation area. We can make your cooperation voluntary or mandatory. Your choice. It wasn't really a choice at all. Tom knew when he was beaten. Fine. We'll cooperate. But I want real compensation. Not government lowball numbers. Fair market value for what you're taking. Plus damages for never telling us we were living next to buried uranium. General Harding nodded. That's reasonable. We'll have a settlement drawn up. In the meantime, please stay away from the excavation site. We're bringing in specialists to safely extract the materials. Over the next 2 days, Tom watched his cornfield transform into a military operation. Tents, equipment, armed guards keeping perimeter. Helicopters came and went. The local sheriff showed up asking questions and was quickly pulled aside by federal agents. Neighbors called asking what was happening, and Tom gave vague answers about government cleanup of old military wreckage. Jake was quiet, guilty about the social media posts that had triggered this response. Tom didn't blame him. Jake had just wanted to share something interesting. Neither of them had understood the scale of what they'd found. On the second evening, as workers prepared to extract the plane's cargo, Agent Dalton approached Tom. Mr. Crawford, there's a complication. What kind of complication? Tom was tired of complications. The logbook you photographed last night. We need those photographs deleted. Tom's hand went to his phone instinctively. You knew I went in the plane? We've had surveillance on the site since we arrived. Dalton's smile was thin. You were observed entering the aircraft and photographing documents. Those photographs constitute classified information. Possessing them is a federal crime. Hand over your phone. Tom made a decision in that moment. A decision born from 40 years of being pushed around by banks, agricultural corporations, government regulations. A decision to push back for once. No. The phone stays with me. And I've already uploaded the photos to cloud storage. Try to take my phone by force and those photos go to every news outlet I can think of. Dalton's expression hardened. That's a serious mistake, Mr. Crawford. Is it? Tom stood his ground. Because from where I'm standing, you need my cooperation more than I need yours. Those photos prove the government buried nuclear materials on private land without disclosure. Prove you've been lying about it for 70 years. That's a scandal worth millions in lawsuits from everyone who's ever farmed this area. The EPA violations alone would be massive. We could arrest you right now, but you won't. Tom felt surprisingly calm. Because arresting me makes this story public. Better to negotiate. So here's my offer. I keep the photos as insurance. You can't silence me or disappear me without them going public. In exchange, I stay quiet about what I found. Sign your non-disclosure agreement. Take your uranium and your plane. Everyone walks away happy. Dalton stared at him for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone, walked away for a private conversation. 5 minutes later, General Harding appeared. Mr. Crawford, Agent Dalton says you're trying to blackmail the United States government. I'm protecting myself. Tom held firm. Your people threatened my family, invaded my property, and would have stolen everything I found without fair compensation. I'm just making sure you keep your promises. The general surprised him by smiling. Fair enough. You've got backbone. I'll give you that. Here's what I can offer. We complete the excavation and removal. You get $2 million compensation for land use, contamination risk, and your silence. The photos stay with you as insurance, but you never publish or share them. If you do, we prosecute to the fullest extent. If you don't, everyone forgets this ever happened. Deal? $2 million was more money than Tom would make farming in 20 years. Maybe more than the farm was worth entirely. It was freedom from debt, security for his old age, an inheritance for Jake. And all he had to do was keep quiet about something the government wanted hidden anyway. Deal. They shook hands. The settlement was drawn up by lawyers and signed that night. Within a week, the excavation was complete. The plane and its cargo were removed so thoroughly that Tom's cornfield looked untouched. You'd never know a bomber had been buried there for 70 years. The money appeared in Tom's account. $2 million, just as promised. He paid off the farm's mortgage, set aside funds for Jake, and finally had breathing room for the first time in decades. But Tom kept the photographs, kept them backed up in multiple secure locations, insurance against the government deciding his silence wasn't worth maintaining. And sometimes, late at night, he'd look at those images and wonder about the crew that had buried the plane, wonder if the uranium had really been secured properly, or if traces remained in his soil. Wonder what other secrets might be buried in fields across America, forgotten by everyone except the agencies that had hidden them. 3 months after the excavation, Tom's life had settled into something resembling normal. The farm was debt-free for the first time in 20 years. He'd bought new equipment, repaired the barn, even taken a vacation to Colorado with Jake. The settlement money had transformed everything, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the story wasn't finished. That somewhere, someone was still interested in what he'd found. He was right. The man appeared on a Tuesday afternoon, driving a rental car and wearing clothes too nice for farm country. He introduced himself as Marcus Webb, freelance journalist. Tom recognized the type immediately. Someone who'd found a lead and was chasing a story. Mr. Crawford, I'm investigating rumors about a World War II aircraft discovered on your property. Tom kept his expression neutral. No idea what you're talking about. Webb smiled. I've spoken with several of your neighbors. They remember the military presence, the excavation equipment, helicopters. Something significant happened here. The question is what? Even if something did happen, I can't discuss it. Tom said it carefully, aware of the NDA he'd signed. Non-disclosure agreements are legally binding. Webb nodded. They are, but they don't prevent me from investigating public records. I found flight manifests from 1945 showing a B-24 bomber that went missing over Missouri. Same unit designation as one your son posted on social media before those posts were mysteriously deleted. I'm thinking that plane wasn't missing at all, just hidden. If you're enjoying this story and want to know what happens next, smash that like button and share this with someone who loves mystery tales. We've got more incredible stories coming your way. Tom said nothing. Webb continued. I'm also looking into Manhattan Project transport missions. There's a gap in the records. Materials that left Los Alamos but never arrived at their destinations. Some historians think that material was diverted, hidden in case the war went badly and we needed to rebuild nuclear capability secretly. Your plane could be part of that. Tom maintained his silence, but Webb was sharp enough to read confirmation in his non-response. Look, Mr. Crawford, I'm not trying to cause you trouble. But this is important history. The public deserves to know about government programs that buried nuclear materials on private land. That's an environmental and ethical issue. You'd be a hero for going public, or I'd be in federal prison for violating an NDA. Tom finally spoke. Whatever you think happened here, you can't prove it. The government cleaned everything up. There's no physical evidence left. But you have proof, don't you? Webb leaned forward. Photographs document something they couldn't take from you. That's why they paid you off instead of silencing you completely. You've got leverage, which means you've got evidence. Tom stood. This conversation is over. Leave my property. Webb left a business card. When you're ready to tell the truth, call me. What you found matters, Mr. Crawford. Secrets like this shouldn't stay buried. After Webb left, Tom called Agent Dalton. The agent answered immediately. Mr. Crawford, what can I do for you? There's a journalist asking questions. Says he's investigating the plane. Dalton was quiet for a moment. Marcus Webb. We're aware of him. He's been digging into Manhattan Project inconsistencies for years, mostly chasing rumors. Has he contacted you directly? Just left my property. Wanted me to go public with what I found. I told him nothing, but he's persistent. We'll handle it. Dalton's tone was reassuring. Webb has no evidence beyond speculation. As long as you maintain your silence, there's no story. He'll eventually move on to other leads. Just ignore him and let us know if he returns. But Webb didn't move on. Over the next weeks, Tom noticed him around town. At the diner, at the feed store, talking to locals. Webb was investigating, building a case from fragments. And he was good at it. Tom learned from Jake that Webb had spoken to the county clerk, gotten records of the property's history, had tracked down families who'd owned the land before Tom's grandfather bought it in 1920, was building a timeline of who might have buried the plane and when. Then Webb found something significant. He showed up at Tom's farm again, this time with an elderly woman. Mr. Crawford, this is Dorothy Sanderson. Her grandfather was Colonel James Sanderson, the officer mentioned in the logbook you found. Tom's blood ran cold. How did you know about the logbook? Dorothy has her grandfather's personal papers. Webb gestured at the woman. Letters he wrote to his wife in 1945, including references to a secret mission in Missouri, a plane full of materials that needed to be hidden because of Soviet infiltration fears. The details match what you found. Dorothy Sanderson was 91, frail but mentally sharp. Young man, my grandfather never forgave himself for that mission. She spoke directly to Tom. He followed orders, buried that plane, swore secrecy, but it haunted him until he died in 1963. He believed the government should have disclosed the burial, monitored the site, protected the families farming that land. Instead, they just covered it up and hoped it stayed hidden. Tom felt sympathy for the old woman, for a family carrying guilt across generations, but he also felt trapped. I'm sorry for what your grandfather went through, ma'am, but I can't help you. I've signed legal agreements. Dorothy nodded sadly. I understand, but please know that some secrets do more harm hidden than revealed. My grandfather believed that. I believe it too. After they left, Tom wrestled with conscience. The settlement money had secured his family's future. Breaking the NDA would mean lawsuits, possibly criminal charges. But Dorothy was right that secrets could do harm. What if there was contamination he didn't know about? What if other families were farming over similar buried materials, unaware of the risks? That night, Jake found him in the barn, staring at nothing. Dad, you okay? Tom looked at his son. Jake, if you knew something important, something the public should know, but revealing it would cost you everything, what would you do? Jake sat beside him. Depends. Is it worth the cost? Does it help people or just satisfy curiosity? Tom thought about that. I don't know. Maybe both. Then you've got to decide which matters more. Your security or your conscience. Jake put a hand on his shoulder. For what it's worth, Dad, I'd support whatever you choose. We've got the money. We'll be okay either way. Tom made his decision that week. He called Marcus Webb. The journalist answered immediately. Mr. Crawford, I wasn't sure I'd hear from you. I'll give you an interview. Tom said it before he could change his mind. Tell you everything I found. But I need guarantees. You protect my identity as much as possible. You corroborate everything independently so the story doesn't rely solely on my testimony, and you prepare me for the legal consequences. Webb was silent for a long moment. You understand this could destroy you financially? The government will come after you hard for breaking the NDA. I know, but some things matter more than money. Tom thought about Dorothy Sanderson, about her grandfather's guilt, about future farmers who might be unknowingly working contaminated land. This matters. They met in secret. Tom bringing his photographs and story. Webb recorded everything, took copies of the evidence, and spent weeks corroborating through independent sources. He found other Manhattan Project researchers willing to speak off the record, located flight records supporting Tom's account, built a story that stood without depending entirely on one farmer's testimony. The article published 3 months later in a major investigative journalism outlet. The Buried Bomber, how the Manhattan Project hid nuclear materials on American farmland. It detailed everything: the plane, the uranium, the 70-year cover-up. Tom was identified only as a Missouri farmer, but anyone local would know who the article described. The response was immediate and explosive. Congressional hearings were called. The EPA launched investigations. Environmental groups demanded surveys of other potential burial sites, and the Justice Department filed lawsuits against Tom for violating his NDA. Agent Dalton showed up the day after publication, furious. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life, Mr. Crawford. We had an agreement." Tom stood on his porch, calm despite the fear. "I did what my conscience required. Sue me if you want. I'll see you in court." The legal battle lasted 2 years. The government sought to recover the settlement money plus damages. Tom's lawyers argued public interest, whistleblower protections, environmental necessity. The case became a cause célèbre, with civil liberties groups funding Tom's defense. In the end, Tom won more than he lost. The court ruled that while he'd technically violated the NDA, the public interest in knowing about buried nuclear materials outweighed the government's secrecy concerns. He had to return $1 million of the settlement but kept the rest. More importantly, his testimony led to the discovery of 3 other buried sites across the country. All were excavated and cleaned up properly. All had been leaking contamination into soil and groundwater for decades. Dozens of families received compensation for health problems potentially linked to exposure. Tom Crawford became briefly famous, profiled in magazines and invited to speak at environmental conferences. But he was still just a farmer at heart. He used the remaining settlement money to establish a foundation supporting families affected by Cold War contamination, turned his 15 minutes of fame into something meaningful. Jake was proud of his father's choice even when it cost them. "Some things," he told Tom, "are worth more than security. Doing the right thing is one of them." 2 years after the article's publication, Tom's life had found a new equilibrium. The farm was smaller now. Some acreage sold to cover legal costs, but still operational. The foundation he'd established was helping families across 3 states who'd been exposed to buried Manhattan Project materials. And Tom had become an unlikely advocate for government transparency, speaking at conferences about the dangers of Cold War secrets. But the story still wasn't finished. The call came on a Thursday morning. A woman's voice, elderly, shaking slightly. "Mr. Crawford? My name is Helen Pierce. My father was the pilot who flew that bomber you found." Tom sat down hard. "The pilot? I thought the crew had all died years ago." "Most did. My father passed in 2019 at age 98. But before he died, he made me promise something. He made me promise that if the plane was ever found, I'd tell the truth about that mission. The whole truth, not just what's in the logbook." Tom grabbed a pen. "I'm listening, ma'am." Helen's voice steadied as she began her story. "My father, Captain Robert Pierce, received orders in April 1945 to transport enriched uranium from Los Alamos to a facility in Virginia. But the orders were irregular, came through unusual channels. No co-pilot briefed, no standard paperwork. Just verbal orders from a colonel he'd never heard of. Captain Pierce followed them because it was wartime, and you didn't question superior officers." Tom was already sensing where this was going. What happened during the flight? Halfway to their destination, they received a radio transmission. New orders: divert to coordinates in Missouri, land in a farmer's field, bury the plane and cargo. The transmission included authentication codes that checked out, so they followed orders. Helen paused. "But after they landed and started digging, my father realized something was wrong. The burial detail that showed up wasn't regular Army. They were OSS, intelligence operatives. And they weren't just burying the plane to hide it from Soviet spies. What were they doing?" Helen's voice dropped. "They were stealing it, Mr. Crawford. The uranium wasn't being hidden for national security. It was being diverted for a covert operation. My father overheard conversations. Something about funding black operations without congressional oversight. About building a secret nuclear capability separate from official military control. The plane and its cargo were the seed money for what became decades of unacknowledged programs." Tom felt the pieces clicking into place. So the uranium was worth more than its material value. It represented proof of illegal operations. Exactly. And my father and his crew were loose ends. They were separated immediately after the burial, assigned to different units, and told their service records from that period were classified. 2 crew members died in what were ruled accidents within a year. My father survived only because he kept his mouth shut. But the guilt ate at him his whole life. Why are you telling me this now? Because the government's response to your revelations proves my father was right. Helen's voice gained strength. They didn't just sue you for breaking an NDA. They launched a systematic campaign to discredit the story, claim the uranium was only research material, deny any wrongdoing. But if it was just an emergency burial during wartime, why the cover-up 70 years later? Why the aggressive response? Because the truth is bigger than one buried plane. There's a whole network of Cold War black programs that were funded through diverted nuclear materials. Your bomber was just one piece. Do you have proof of this? My father's testimony, recorded before he died. Helen said it firmly. Detailed interviews where he names names, describes operations, provides documentation he'd secretly kept. I'm prepared to release everything, but I wanted to contact you first. You've already fought this fight. I wanted to offer you the chance to break the story. Tom thought about that. Thought about the cost of the last revelation and whether he was willing to pay again. Ma'am, if what you're saying is true, this is bigger than me. This needs to go to professional investigators, people with resources to chase down every lead. I've already contacted Marcus Webb. Helen surprised him. He's the journalist who published your story. He's interested, but he wants corroboration from you. He wants to know if anything you found supports my father's account. Tom pulled out his secured files, the photographs he'd kept despite everything. Let me review what I have. Can I call you back? They exchanged contact information. After hanging up, Tom spent hours going through the photographs. The logbook entries he'd dismissed as routine suddenly looked different through Helen's lens. References to Colonel Sanderson weren't just about chain of command. They were about a specific officer who'd run black operations. The uranium's serial numbers didn't match official Manhattan Project records, suggesting they'd been diverted from regular inventory. He called Marcus Webb. The journalist was excited. If Helen Pierce's testimony is accurate, this expands from one buried plane to systematic theft of nuclear materials. That's a decades-long conspiracy involving military intelligence and possibly civilian government officials. It's the biggest story I've ever worked on. Are you willing to be part of it? Tom hesitated. The last story had cost him dearly. This one would be worse. The enemies would be more powerful, the stakes higher. But Helen's father had kept silent for 70 years out of fear. Tom had a chance to ensure that silence hadn't been for nothing. I'm in. But we do this right. Every fact checked, every source verified. I won't be part of a conspiracy theory. We're telling truth, not chasing ghosts. The investigation took 8 months. Webb worked with a team of journalists, all contributing expertise. They tracked down other crew members' families, found corroborating documents in newly declassified archives, and identified patterns of missing nuclear materials across the Manhattan Project's history. They found evidence of diverted uranium funding, covert operations in Southeast Asia, South America, and Eastern Europe during the Cold War. Found connections to intelligence operations that had never been officially acknowledged. The story they built was massive, sprawling, and meticulously documented. Publication was scheduled for a major investigative series. 3 days before release, Tom received a visit. Not from federal agents this time, but from someone more dangerous. The man wore an expensive suit and introduced himself as Richard Carlson, attorney representing several unnamed clients. Mr. Crawford, my clients are aware of the upcoming publication. They're prepared to offer you $10 million to stop it. Tom blinked at the figure. $10 million to stay quiet? That's more than the plane's contents were worth. Much more. Carlson smiled. My clients have deep pockets and strong motivations. The story you're about to help publish will damage reputations, destroy careers, and expose operations that need to stay hidden for legitimate national security reasons. $10 million to walk away. You'll never have to work again. You can live whatever life you want. It was tempting in a way Tom hadn't expected. $10 million was generational wealth. Jake's future secured. Grandchildren Tom didn't have yet provided for. A life without struggle or worry. All for silence about events 70 years old, about programs that might actually serve legitimate security purposes. But Tom thought about Helen Pierce's father, about Captain Robert Pierce carrying guilt to his grave, about the crew members who'd died suspiciously, about all the people across America who'd unknowingly lived on contaminated land because secrets mattered more than their safety. No, Tom said it firmly. The story publishes as scheduled. Some truths are too important to bury, regardless of the price. Carlson's expression hardened. You're making enemies you can't afford, Mr. Crawford. My clients have resources and patience. They'll destroy you financially, professionally, personally. They'll make you wish you'd taken the money. Then I'll have something in common with Captain Pierce. Tom stood. He survived decades of that pressure. So will I. Now get off my property. The story published 3 days later across multiple platforms simultaneously. Nuclear Secrets, the Cold War black programs funded by stolen uranium. It was explosive, detailed, and undeniable. Congressional committees immediately launched investigations. Intelligence agencies went into crisis mode. Several retired officials were subpoenaed, and public pressure forced declassification of documents that confirmed the core allegations. Tom became a target. His taxes were audited. His bank accounts frozen pending investigation. Anonymous smear campaigns questioned his credibility and motives. But this time, he wasn't alone. Helen Pierce went public with her father's testimony, lending weight to the revelations. Other families of Manhattan Project personnel came forward with their own stories. A movement formed around demanding transparency about Cold War operations. Tom found himself part of something larger than one farmer's fight. The legal harassment continued for another year. But Tom weathered it, supported by civil liberties organizations and public opinion that had turned against decades of government secrecy. Eventually, grudgingly, official investigations confirmed most of the revelations. Apologies were issued. Compensation funds established. Declassification efforts expanded. It wasn't perfect justice, but it was something. More than Captain Pierce had lived to see. 5 years after finding the buried bomber, Tom Crawford stood on his farm watching Jake's children play in the cornfield. His son had married, started a family, moved back to help run the farm. The land was smaller now but prosperous, free of the debt that had crushed previous generations. And most importantly, it was clean. EPA surveys had confirmed no lasting contamination from the buried uranium. The military's removal had been thorough, at least in that regard. Tom's phone rang. An unknown number, but he'd learned to answer those. Sometimes they were families grateful for his advocacy. Sometimes survivors of Cold War programs reaching out with their stories. This call was different. Mr. Crawford, my name is Director Sarah Chen, CIA. I'd like to meet with you if possible. Tom was instantly wary. A CIA director calling directly was unusual and probably not good news. For what purpose, Director Chen? To apologize. Her voice held unexpected sincerity. And to ask for your help. They met at a discreet location, a coffee shop in Columbia far from Tom's farm. Director Chen was younger than he expected, maybe 50, with sharp eyes that had seen things she couldn't discuss. She got straight to the point. The investigations sparked by your revelations have been painful for the intelligence community. We've had to confront decades of unacknowledged operations, questionable decisions made in the name of national security. But they've also forced necessary reforms, greater oversight, better accountability, transparency where possible. You've changed how we operate, Mr. Crawford. Not all of us are happy about it, but many recognize it was needed. Tom studied her carefully. That's quite an admission from a CIA director. What do you want from me? Chen pulled out a folder. We've identified 47 additional sites where nuclear materials or other classified cargo may have been buried during the Cold War. Most are on private land. Some may be contaminated. All represent potential health hazards if not properly handled. We need someone the public trusts to help coordinate recovery efforts. Someone who understands both the government's security concerns and landowners' rights. You want me to work for the CIA? Tom almost laughed. After everything? Not for us, Chen corrected. With us. As an independent advocate, you'd have access to classified information necessary to locate the sites, but you'd report to a civilian oversight board, not agency management. Your job would be protecting the families affected, ensuring proper cleanup, and maintaining public trust in the process. We need someone who's proven they can't be bought or intimidated. Tom thought about it. The work would consume his remaining years, would mean more legal battles, more threats, more stress, but it would also mean ensuring other families didn't suffer what his had, didn't live unknowingly on contaminated land while the government hoped the problem stayed buried. What guarantees do I have that this isn't just another way to control the narrative? Chen slid papers across the table. Full legal protections? Independent authority and a clause stating that if you believe the government is acting in bad faith, you can go public with everything you've learned without penalty. We're serious about reform, Mr. Crawford, but we need advocates who understand the real security concerns alongside the transparency requirements. Tom read the documents carefully. They seemed legitimate, with oversight provisions that would allow him to maintain independence. I'll need to discuss this with my family, and I want Marcus Webb involved as a monitor, someone outside the process to ensure accountability. Done. Chen stood, offering her hand. Think it over, but understand that every day we delay, families are potentially being exposed to contamination we could prevent. Tom shook her hand, still wary but intrigued by the possibility of meaningful work. He consulted Jake that evening. His son was characteristically direct. Dad, you're 70 years old. You've fought enough battles. You could retire, enjoy your grandchildren, let someone else handle this. I could. Tom watched his grandchildren playing. But if not me, then who? How many people have the experience, the credibility, and the stubbornness to stand up to both government secrecy and public hysteria? This work matters, Jake. It could save lives. Jake sighed. Then you already know what you're going to do. You just wanted my blessing. You have it. But promise me you'll be careful. These people play for keeps. Tom accepted the position 2 weeks later. The work was exactly as difficult as he'd anticipated. Identifying burial sites meant reviewing decades of classified documents. Notifying landowners required careful diplomacy, explaining that their property might contain hazardous materials without causing panic. Coordinating cleanups involved balancing security concerns with public safety, but Tom discovered he was good at it. His credibility as someone who'd fought the government and won gave him trust with skeptical landowners. His understanding of farming helped him relate to rural families affected by the discoveries, and his newfound connections within intelligence agencies gave him access to information that allowed proper remediation. Over 3 years, they identified and cleaned up 32 sites. Each one was a small victory. Each family helped was validation of the choice to keep fighting rather than accept silence. Marcus Webb documented the process, publishing updates that kept public attention focused on the issue. The transparency Tom insisted on became a model for other classified cleanup programs. Slowly, grudgingly, the culture of automatic secrecy began shifting toward disclosure when possible. Tom's advocacy helped establish precedents that would outlast his involvement. He was 81 when declining health finally forced him to step back. Jake had taken over farm operations entirely, and Tom's grandchildren were teenagers now. He'd lived to see meaningful change, had helped families across America, and had proven that one stubborn farmer could hold powerful institutions accountable. His final act was establishing an advocacy organization staffed by former intelligence officers and civil liberties lawyers. They would continue the work of identifying Cold War burial sites and ensuring proper cleanup. Tom's experience and connections gave the organization credibility with both government and public. It would outlive him, which was what mattered. The week before Tom died, Marcus Webb visited the farm for a final interview. They sat on the porch, overlooking fields that had started everything. Webb asked the question he'd been saving. Mr. Crawford, knowing everything that happened, all the costs and consequences, would you make the same choices again? Tom was quiet for a long moment. That bomber buried in my field gave me a choice. Take the money, stay silent, live comfortably, or speak up, face the consequences, and maybe change things for the better. He looked at his grandson playing in the yard. I'd make the same choice every time. Some things matter more than comfort or security. Truth matters. Accountability matters. Making sure the next generation doesn't inherit our secrets and lies, that matters most of all. Webb published that interview as Tom's obituary when he passed 3 weeks later. The farmer who wouldn't stay silent. Tom Crawford's fight against Cold War secrecy. It was picked up nationally, remembered by people who'd followed the story, honored by families he'd helped. Jake Crawford inherited the farm and his father's advocacy work. He expanded the organization Tom had founded, recruited more families affected by Cold War programs, and continued pushing for transparency. The work became a family legacy, passed to Tom's grandchildren, who grew up hearing stories about the bomber in the cornfield and the truth it had revealed. The actual B-24 Liberator was eventually donated to a museum after full decontamination. It sits there now with a plaque explaining its history. Not the sanitized version the military preferred, but the full truth Tom had fought to reveal. Visitors can see the cargo hold where uranium had been stored, can read about the diversion operation and the decades of cover-up, can learn about one farmer who'd refused to let secrets stay buried. And in that museum, there's a quote from Tom Crawford displayed prominently. "They told me the plane was worth $10 million. They were wrong. The truth it contained was priceless." Some discoveries change your life. Some change history. The trick is having the courage to pursue the second, even when accepting the first would be easier. That quote resonates with visitors, particularly those who've faced their own choices between comfort and conscience. Tom Crawford became a symbol of ordinary people standing against institutional power. His story inspired others to question, to investigate, to demand accountability. The cornfield where the bomber was found is productive farmland again, growing crops that feed families across America. There's nothing to mark the spot where a B-24 Liberator sat buried for 70 years. Nothing except the knowledge that one farmer dug there, found truth and refused to rebury it. That's legacy enough. That's more than most people leave behind. As Jake told his children, their grandfather's real crop wasn't corn or soybeans. It was accountability. He planted it in Missouri soil, fertilized it with stubborn courage, and harvested truth that fed an entire nation's need for honest reckoning with its past. That's the best thing you can grow on American farmland.